All right, YouTube. I knew that I was going to be requested to cover the Oklahoma Satanist monument and the courthouse stuff, so I'll cover it now. It's a fairly clear principle of equal use of this public land. By the way, as a now pagan, former Satanist, whatever, occultist, whatever you want to term it, I do not care if Christians put the Ten Commandments or a statue of Jesus or a statue of Moses or a statue of the Ark of the Covenant or whatever else they want to put in a courthouse, in some other government building. It doesn't affect me, number one. I probably will never see it. Number two, they're not making me perform some sort of Jesus ritual, praising Jesus before I go into the court or wherever. It doesn't really affect me, so I don't care. I can understand, however, the point of these Satanists and atheists and all the other groups suing to get their own monuments in here. If you're going to have a Christian monument, and the people of Oklahoma need to understand this because they seem to have the all too common delusion that this country was founded as a specifically Christian nation. It was not. You can read quotes from the founders. Most of them were utterly irreligious. Thomas Jefferson made his own Bible to remove all the paranormal superstitious stuff from it. Literally made his own Bible to remove that material. Benjamin Franklin was having orgies in his basement and founded the Hell Devils Club. George Washington was not a Christian. We have it on good authority from Thomas Jefferson. John Adams said this would be the best of all possible worlds if there were no religion in it. These people were deists and agnostics. They didn't care about the church. They did believe in God, largely speaking, but they didn't really see religion as all that important. What people need to realize, our founders, when this country was built, came out of the Enlightenment era. Google it. The Enlightenment era, an era where enlightened, logical, rational thought took precedence over religious values, or were co-opted with those religious values to try to temper it and find a better source of truth about what God wants. This is when the groups like the Masons became big. Most of these people were Freemasons. The Freemasons still worship Lucifer. If you look up again what Lucifer means, you'll find they're talking about Jesus. Hate to burst your conspiracy theory bubbles, but these people in Oklahoma need to realize, no, this is not a Christian nation. Were there Christian values incorporated into the nation? Yes. Not until the late progressive era, the early 1900s and some in the late 1800s, with the temperance movement, which was when fundamentalism became common in the United States. Fundamentalism was extremely uncommon outside of, oddly, New England, which is now the most atheistic part of the United States, until this period of time. Look up your history. Study some U.S. history. If you've taken an AP U.S. history course, you probably already know this. Study it. However, I don't care if the Ten Commandments is there. This was also not founded to be an utterly secular nation. And the atheists are wrong on this. The ACLU that's suing to have this monument removed don't seem to understand this. This was never meant to be a secular nation or a Christian nation. It was meant to be a pluralistic nation. A nation in which people from various cultures, which the founders, they weren't dumb. They knew people were going to immigrate from other parts of the world eventually. They were forward-thinking Enlightenment era individuals. They knew this was going to happen. They knew that there would be Hispanics moving into the country. They knew there would be Chinese people moving into the country. They knew there'd be Orthodox people from Eastern Europe moving into the country. They didn't care, because their idea about this country was that people would be judged on their own merits and that all of their other beliefs, if they weren't hurting anybody else, really didn't matter, as long as it was kept out of government. Well, putting a Ten Commandments monument in the court is not interfering with the government's proceedings, with judiciary proceedings. It's not. It's a piece of rock with words etched on it. Any more than this Satanist statue, if it goes up, which I predict that it will, because clearly it'd be unconstitutional to block it, it's not going to interfere with anyone. It'll rustle jimmies, it'll bother the moralists, but is it really going to interfere with anything? No. It hurts nobody. They'll call it a graven image and say it's heathenistic and it's terrible and it's a sin monument. Who cares? It doesn't matter. And what the moralists also need to understand is the United States, in religiosity, peaked in about the 1950s, right when we were worried that we were going to get blown off the face of the earth. Before that, the United States actually was less religious than most of Europe. It was less religious than most of the world back then. Most other cultures on earth were more religious than the United States until the temperance movement. Study your damn history. people need to understand. It's certainly not a Christian nation any more than it was meant to be an atheistic secular nation. I am tired of the political correctness. I see it as a greater threat. I see secular political correctness as even worse a foe than moralism, actually. And I say this as someone who is deeply, deeply against Christianity and thinks that it's the root of most of the evil in the Western world. I say this because if the politically correct sort of secular individuals take over, my spiritual beliefs can't be expressed in public. Theirs can't, the Christians can't, the Hindus can't, the Jews can't, the Muslims can't. The Sikhs can't, any of these groups, essentially self-censoring themselves because they're afraid that somebody will sue them or view them as evil or backwards. You can be spiritual and not religious. And I've said this before. I'm not religious. I don't go to church or some temple or worship out in the graveyards, but I'm still a spiritual individual. It doesn't really affect my views on things. My mind is ruled by logic and reason. Those are simply peripheral views that I happen to indulge in. It doesn't affect you. It doesn't affect anybody. If I wanted to put up a monument and I had the money to do so, I could do that. I could put it in any courthouse that I wanted, and it wouldn't affect you. What's really funny is that primarily these are people from other states that are interfering with this monument erection in Oklahoma. Now, I can understand the Satanists have certainly, even though they're based in New York, have a right to put up their monument. To the atheists, I would say if you don't like the Ten Commandments, and you don't like Christianity being in the public square, compete with it. Like I said, competing ideas drives progress. It is the most simple, most elementary concept that you can possibly imagine, and it is one of the founding concepts of this country. Competition. Competing ideas will lead to the weaker, more inferior idea being disused. It will be crushed, or it will be lessened in strength over time. I see this happening with Christianity today. It's falling out of favor in the Western world. It's being replaced by paganism, which is inherently, I believe, morally superior, with secularism, which I believe is logically superior to Christianity, and with liberal Christianity, sort of deism, agnosticism, Unitarians and Episcopals and so forth, which I believe is superior on both counts. But that's not to say that I think that fundamentalists, who obviously erected this monument to the Ten Commandments in the first place, shouldn't have their say too. I think competition-wise, it's fairly clear, and this is the atheists should love this idea. It goes right along with evolution, with the process of natural selection. If you've got competing ideas, the best one eventually, given enough time, and a fair shake will win out. Well, what I would say is go pluralistic. Let all of these religious groups, and atheistic groups too, compete. Have their own monuments up. Go out and speak to the public. Do whatever they want, and eventually, given enough time, the ones that make more sense will grow. The ones that make less sense will decline. We've seen it before. Religions have been replaced by other religions over and over again. Philosophies come and go. Governments, empires, everything comes and goes. Entire races come and go. When the colonial era individuals burst into the Third World in the 1500s and through the Victorian and Edwardian era, they displaced most of the native people they encountered when it was feasible to do so, because they had better technology, they were more well organized, they had better medicine, they had better everything. They displaced them. It's natural selection. Of course, we look back on that and say, oh, those terrible genocidal maniacs. I don't. I'm part Native American. The Native American cultures largely sucked. And I say they didn't have good technology. Part of it was simply the importation of disease. Do I think their culture should be wiped out? No, of course not. They should be given their land. It was rightfully theirs. They'd already settled, and be allowed to live in peace for however long they want to live there. But I don't shed any tears over the deaths of these people who were themselves warring amongst themselves for centuries, and nobody seems to want to admit that they did. They have some sort of noble savage bullshit going on. But this is natural selection. Let it happen. When you move to a completely politically correct secularized system, which you can see at work in the past in the USSR or China or some place like that, which completely stamps on people's liberty, what you see, people suffer, number one. Good ideas get squished out in favor of shitty ideas because they're not being allowed to compete. Whatever some head honcho, politically correct communist dictator bullshit artist says, goes. You see it in Cuba, you see it in North Korea, you see it in the USSR, you see it in formerly communist China before the Gang of Four was displaced. You see it all over the world. You see it in fascist dictatorships. You see it everywhere. And it never works. Because competition is what works. Competition among organisms kept life alive on this planet through the process of natural selection for billions of years. It's not going to stop. This process must continue. For any culture that wishes to survive, it must have a competitive aspect. Competitive ideas on business, on ideas themselves, philosophies, even religions. Religions change in response to external stimuli in the exact same manner that an organism changes in response to external stimuli. You have bottleneck effect going on with religions. 90% of the religion gets wiped out. Well, this one sect in a sheltered area with different ideas is now the dominant force within that religion. Well, now theirs are perpetuated. They were the ones that survived. Does it always work for the betterment of man? No, of course not. But generally speaking, you have a trend moving towards religions making more sense nowadays than they used to. Generally speaking, Christianity is liberalizing. Evangelical Christianity is dying. It is dying. I've already showed you that it's dying. It's declining all over the Western world. It's barely making headway now in Africa. Some of those people are fighting back against it. Islam's dying out. Islamists are liberalizing. In the last century, Islamic countries where women couldn't do anything have liberalized. Turkey has liberalized. Partially. Socially, they haven't liberalized as much. But as far as law goes, yes, they've liberalized. Tunisia, Lebanon. The Lebanese people are one of the most liberal groups within Islam. Even in Iran, they've liberalized some. You don't see people going around in full hijabs all the time anymore over there. Things are improving. They improve slowly. You can't force them to improve more just by cracking down on free speech and saying to people, you can't put up your monument, nobody can put up anything. We're just going to have a blank wall there because anything that we put on this wall might offend somebody. This is more sickening, more culturally disturbing, more destructive towards the very fabric of Western society and Western ideals upon which the entire Western world was founded than any moralist philosophy. It would be better for the Mormons to run the damn country than to have politically correct snobs running it. They're the most utter form of degenerate you can possibly think. They deny, these people all believe in evolution. I do as well, by the way. I'm not some backwards Tea Party Bible humper. But they believe in evolution, but they're not willing to let it, to watch it operate on a social level. They're not going far enough. They say, well, biological evolution's fine, but cultural evolution, it's terrible. And social Darwinism, cultural engineering, all of these buzzwords that they throw around, they don't even understand what it means. It works. It's worked for thousands of years. Cultures compete. Religions compete. Even languages compete. You have Creole languages cropping up all over that compete with the main language of the society. You have that in response to some external stimuli. Let it happen. Let them put up their Satan monument. Let the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster put up a little metallic noodle strainer or whatever the hell you would call it. I don't know what the hell those things are called. By the way, Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster had a heyday a little while ago. Some city council person became the first Pastafarian elected to office. Obviously, soon they'll have a governor and take over the U.S. and we'll all be a bunch of gay degenerates like the moralists think. But seriously, I don't care. I don't care what religious monuments you put up. Just put them up anyway. And if the courthouse tells you no, buy a property across from it and put up a 50-foot tall bronze statue of the devil. Really get them rustled. And when the Christians come to try to, melt it down or take it away or something, shoot them. Because you're defending your property. In Oklahoma, by the way, that's probably legal. They're an extremely conservative state. Stop being pussies. Stop being assholes constantly for your entire life and worrying about what somebody else might believe. It doesn't affect you until they are forcing their beliefs on you. By the way, I would say that telling people to swear upon the Bible, sorry, it's very cold here, in court would be unacceptable. I think that should be completely done away with. Unless they also want to give people, the Quran option and the God delusion option and things like that. I don't think there should be prayer in schools. I don't care if the kids pray before a test, but they shouldn't be led in prayer. They should take references to God off money. I'll concede that point because that was not even, they changed the motto of the United States in the 50s. That was not even original to our country. We should return to our actual Enlightenment values and let all these groups compete. And stop worrying that the sky is going to fall because somebody puts up a statue of Lucifer in a courthouse, or worried that we're going to be crippled as a society because the Ten Commandments happens to be right next to it. And if the secular individuals worry so about this, put your own monument up, a monument to reason. Have a statue of some of our founders. Have a little Mount Rushmore mock-up. Have like Washington, Jefferson, whoever, and have little quotes below them saying how much they obviously despised Christian religion. Put it up as a monument. People will look at those quotes and say, I didn't know that. And they'll go research it on Wikipedia and Google and everything else. And then maybe they'll come around to your view because they'll realize, well, I idolized George Washington. It turns out he was actually an agnostic. Do it and stop worrying about what other people might believe. And that's the final word. Peace out.